Good morning, Mr. Beer. We're one short here because Miss Eliason Norris is unwell today, so she'll be following either remotely or catching up, as the case may be, depending on how well she feels.
Good morning, sir. Thank you. Can I call Bruce McNiven, please?
Repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Good morning, Mr. McNiven.
Good morning.
My name is Jason Beer, and I ask questions on behalf of the inquiry. Can you give us your full name, please?
My full name is James Bruce McNiven.
And thank you for providing a witness statement to the inquiry and for attending today. We're very grateful to you for the assistance that you have given to this investigation and will give to this investigation. Can you look, please, at the hard copy witness statement that should be in front of you, which, excluding the exhibits, I think is 12 pages in length. For the transcript, the reference is WITN 04120100. And look at the last page, page 12. Is that your signature?
It is.
And are the contents of that witness statement true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
They are.
A copy of that witness statement will be uploaded to the inquiry's website. I'm therefore not going to ask you about every part of it. Do you understand?
I do.
Can I start with some questions about your background and experience? I think you were first employed by the Post Office in 1973, is that right?
That's correct.
And did you have a background before then?
A background before then was,
Yes.
was largely in science-related businesses. And then I converted to general management.
And did you have any qualifications in management or similar?
I was a member of the Institute of what was then Personnel Management, now Human Resources.
In 1986, I think you became the district manager of for post office counters in Newcastle. Is that right?
Correct.
And in 1993, you became head of the retail network for the North East area. Is that right?
That's correct.
In 1996, you became the deputy director of the Programme Delivery Authority, known as the PDA, and responsible, therefore, for elements of the delivery of the Horizon system. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Was that a promotion?
Yes, it was.
Can you tell us the role and purpose of the PDA, please?
The PDA was set up to represent the parties to the contract, DSS and the Post Office, and to interface with ICL Pathway on the delivery of the solution which was contained within that contract.
How many people worked in the PDA?
In terms of direct employed people, probably of the order of 100. Majority, I would say, was from benefits agency, some 40 or so staff from post office counters, and also a number of contracted people and advisors from outside concerns such as accountancy.
And who was your line manager or senior within the PDA?
Yes, the PDA director was a chap called Peter Crane, who had been appointed by DSS.
And that's C-R-E-H-A-N.
C-R-A-H-A-N.
And he was, as you said, a DSS or benefits agency employee, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
And so would you describe him as your line manager?
Yes, very much so. He was, his title was Director of the Programme Delivery Authority, and I was Deputy Director of the Programme Delivery Authority.
And who was responsible, out of the pair of you, for reporting back to the Post Office as to the work of the PDA?
We were jointly responsible through the PDA board, which comprised directors from both benefits agency and post office counters.
You tell us in your witness statement, there's no need to look it up at the moment, it's paragraph 6, that you reported back to the joint BA/PO programme board.
Yeah.
How did the pair of you report back jointly to that programme board?
Peter would take the lead in terms of the overall progress of the solution with Pathway. I would report back on areas within more of my responsibility, such as progress on implementation plans, rollout plans, and generally speaking, the work being done by the Post Office constituent of the PDA.
Did the BA Post Office Programme Board have regular meetings?
Yes, at least monthly.
And would you report to that board in writing?
There would be a written report to the board, and then we would take questions on the day.
Was there any other reporting mechanism to the board, or was that the principal way in which reporting was effected?
That was the principal way in which reporting was effected. I had obviously conversations and dotted line responsibility back into Post Office Counters Limited, with whom I would have conversations with people like Paul Rich, etc., who might just ask advice on certain aspects.
That's what I want to ask you about in particular, what that dotted line consisted of and to whom it went, i.e. outside of the programme board.
Yeah.
But just sticking with the programme board for the moment, what was the purpose of the programme board?
The programme board was there to confirm that progress was being made relative to the contract with ICL Pathway, to deal with any problems which were arising, particularly around the release of software and the programme behind that release, and to ensure that Benefits Agency were aware of that progress so that they could modify or accelerate their plans accordingly.
Was it a decision-making body?
It was a decision-making body in terms of requiring myself or Peter or other members of the PDA to take issues back to ICL Pathway and to resolve them as they felt appropriate.
Did it have any broader decision-making role than that? I.e.
This is the board, still the
Yes,
board we're
the
talking
board, yeah.
about. I think that the board would ultimately exercise an authority about the extent to which they were convinced by the progress. They held an authority about whether or not the programme should continue. That would be something done with the joint sponsors. And they had the responsibility for ensuring that ICL Pathway were held accountable for the progress of the programme.
And who from the Post Office can you recall as being a member of the programme board?
Paul Rich was a member of the programme board. He was the principal member of the programme board.
Anyone else you can recall now?
Not directly. He would report back to the Managing Director of Post Office Counters Limited.
That was the next question. To whom did the programme board report?
The programme board then separately would report back to the sponsor organisations. So Post Office Counters Limited board on one hand, the DSS board on the other, and they would then take, I guess, informed decision making from them back to the programme development board to instruct us and to instruct Pathway about the process which should then follow and the extent to which progress was being made.
So was it a reporting board, i.e. used to pool information from the programme delivery authority and then act as a conduit back to the main boards of each organisation?
Yes, I think
or did it enjoy its own decision-making powers?
I would say a combination of the two. I think the PDA board were conscious that they were representing the two contracted authorities and that the two contracted authorities had the ultimate decision making. So they would be helping the contracted authorities to understand the extent to which the contract was being moved forward and delivered.
Had you worked in the delivery of a project with a large company like ICL Pathway or Fujitsu previously?
No, it was a new experience for me.
Had you worked on the delivery of a large project that involved a private finance initiative contract before?
No, I had not.
Had anyone on the PDA, to your knowledge?
Not to my knowledge.
Had anyone within the programme board, to your knowledge?
Not to my knowledge.
I think you subsequently became general manager of the Horizon implementation team, is that right?
Yes, when the PDA was wound up and responsibility was moved back to the host businesses, I moved back with that title and that responsibility.
And when was that, please?
I think the last PDA board meeting was towards the end of 1998. I would say September 1998.
And then you became general manager of the Horizon implementation team.
That's correct.
And was that a role within the post office alone?
Indeed, yes.
And was that a promotion?
No, that was a sideways move.
What was the role and purpose of the Horizon implementation team?
The Horizon implementation team largely focused on the actual physical rollout mechanism. So helping to enable the office surveys that had to be proceeded with before an office could be converted, with any physical modifications that were required at those offices, with the actual commissioning and going live with individual offices, and playing all that in to the joint programme that existed between the post office and Pathway.
How many people were in the Horizon implementation team?
I would say between 40 and 50.
And who was your line manager, or to whom did you report?
Then I would report to Dave Miller.
And were you therefore in charge of the Horizon implementation team?
Yes,
And so you were responsible for the management of that
I was.
40 or 50 people?
Yes.
I think your role in relation to the Horizon system ended at some point in 1999, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
Can you help us as to precisely when? And not necessarily a date, but maybe a month?
Yeah, I think it was probably December 1999 when arrangements were in place to renew the rollout in January of the following year.
And why did you move on in December 1999?
I think rules changed. I think on the ground there were people there who had responsibility for the field implementation. Many things were in place to renew the rollout. So really the job had transferred into its component parts, and the role that I specifically had did not have the same strength of purpose.
As in nobody took over from you?
Not immediately. A person who worked for me, I think his role was expanded to the Horizon Field implementation role. I think latterly someone else from the business was brought in to perhaps take over some of the former responsibilities I had and to provide a more direct management input to the team.
Did you report back to the post office board in that role?
No.
Did you report back to the Post Office Counters Limited board in that role?
Not directly. I reported back to Dave Miller, who was a member of the Post Office Counters Board, through a Horizon management team that he chaired, of which I was a member.
And how regularly did that body meet?
Latterly, at least a month formally, but the same people would be drawn together probably almost on a weekly basis because of the pace of events by that time.
And how did you understand that reports back to the Post Office Counters Limited Board were made?
We all made our constituent parts. So I would perhaps write about or contribute to a report about the pace of rollout, the readiness of the post office estate, the situation regarding training, etc. So I would report back on my individual responsibilities. Other people would do the same, and it would be combined into a full report.
Looking back now, having had the benefit of some years of reflection, what would be your overriding view of the work of the Programme Delivery Authority?
I think the work of the Programme Delivery Authority did as well as it could within the constraints it was working under. I think there was a will to work together. The staff in the PDA, both Puckle and BA, worked well together. But we were conscious that we were a bit of a forced marriage. We had somewhat different objectives. I think that was always realised. So we were trying to make the best of what we had. I think as the Programme Delivery Authority developed, and just before they split back into their host organisations, it was becoming increasingly difficult, I have to say, because the objectives of each party were beginning to move further and further apart.
You said that it worked well given the constraints under which it was working, or the constraints it was working under. What were those constraints? Were they only different objectives, or were there other constraints?
No, I think they were principally about different objectives, which were becoming clearer as time passed. I mean, the other constraints within which it worked was the whole relationship with ICL Pathway, which I think has been rehearsed previously by other witnesses. And that was a constant source of frustration.
Why was it a source of frustration?
The inability, well, the PFI contract was the primary barrier. The role we had in the PDA was one of assurance. So, and largely documented assurance before we could actually see anything developing. So, a set of requirements would be translated by ICL Pathway into a solution. That solution would be recorded and documented. And the role we largely had, certainly from a POCL perspective, was to try and understand what they intended to do and to try and assure that their intentions met the requirements. And as I say, often this was a nebulous process based on a document before we could actually see things operating. So it was frustrating, and trying to get behind that to find out a bit more about the processes, the thinking, how that was going to come together was extremely difficult. Now, I'm talking particularly from a POCL interest here, but working with the Benefits Agency, I was party to their frustrations as well, as not seeing how things were developing, and the constant requirement for replans. I think my first 6 months to a year of working at the PDA was almost entirely involved in replanning exercises as the timescales slipped. So new plans had to then be devised. That had impact onto the implementation and rollout plans, of course, of which I had a particular interest. But I think within that first year, this happened 3 times. So that was a very frustrating aspect.
Any other reflections overall on the way in which the PDA works, or how it functioned, or the pressures under which you were operating?
Along with Peter Crane, I met frequently with ICL Pathway, normally at their premises, and we would go through a long list of issues that were arising. They were as helpful, I think, as they could be, but it was becoming clear that their development processes were lagging behind. And all we could do was take back as much information as we could and try to understand how lags in that process were going to impact on the plans which we had developed. It was difficult. I don't think through any ill will. I think Pathway's perspective on our assurance was probably that we strayed too far into interference. And I think that constant tension was always there.
Given what you've mentioned as to the fundamentally different objectives of the two client contracting parties and constant frustrations with the way that ICL was operating and working and delivering, why did, in your view, the project proceed? Why was it not brought to a stop?
Well, it was brought to a stop in terms of its initial condition. I mean, the joint programme was brought to a stop by BA when they essentially withdrew from the programme. So there was a point, I guess, in 1998 where post office counters had to decide whether to continue a relationship with ICL Pathway to get something over the line, which was to the post office's benefit, or to withdraw. And there were many, many discussions around this subject. The decision obviously eventually was taken that it was in post office interest to continue, because to stop and try and restart the whole process would put POCL so far behind the momentum of the DSS to move to different payment methods that we would probably never catch up. They had withdrawn from the card payment process, which is where we had come in. That was seen to be the way ahead for both parties. Very quickly, I think it became apparent that DSS did not favour that solution. I think that position was amplified by a change of government. I think when the Blair government came in May 1997, they had a vision of social inclusion, which was about people having bank accounts rather than physical payment methods over a post office counter. And I think DSS regarded that as the way ahead. So what we were trying to develop with Benefits Agency was something which was to preserve the post office position for as long as we possibly could, until we could adopt a technological solution which would allow us to work alongside those decisions. So ultimately, decision was taken that without technology, and without technology soon, and without the technology which had at least in part been developed, the whole future of the post office as it was constituted was very much in doubt.
You sat in your position, I think, would this be right, in a space between directors and executives on the one hand,
Yeah.
the very senior management of POCL, and those responsible at a lower level on the ground for actual delivery.
Yeah.
Did you feel any pressures from above to ensure that this project proceeded?
At the point at which I have been talking when BA withdrew, the pressure was the pressure of continuity, that we had something to deliver, that we had a business at the end. And that was significant, and I think people signed up to that concept. As we go further downstream towards the whole process of acceptance of the then ICO pathway solution for post office counters, I think the pressures changed. I think we still had that pressure to deliver something for the future of the business.
In what way did the pressures change? We're talking here from sort of April 99 onwards.
Yes, I think as part of the, if I can step back, when I was working for the PDA, the impetus was from the PDA to Pathway to get something done. When Post Office took on the contract, very quickly I think the impetus changed to being from ICL and Pathway to get this thing over the line as soon as possible, because quite clearly it was clear to us there were enormous pressures on Pathway and the people in Pathway to get this delivered because of the pressures on ICL and Fujitsu, given the background and the degree of finance they had put into the project.
So this switch, am I understanding it correctly to say that it was a move from pressure being placed on ICL to a pressure coming from ICL for contractual and fiscal reasons?
I think in the broadest sense that's probably true. There was still pressure from ourselves in Post Office counters back to ICL Pathway in terms of this whole aspect of assurance and making sure that what they were delivering was fit for purpose. So we had these competing pressures of ICL Pathway wanting to move this contractually over a line at which they were paid, and most of us on the ground in Post Office counters trying to ensure that what was being delivered was of a satisfactory quality to allow that to happen. I mean, also I think at the time we all knew everything else that was happening, the Treasury review, there was a political interest. So although these things were happening at a different level, at the working level contact with ICL Pathway, these were quite apparent.
In what way?
In
were
the
they
way,
tangible?
in the way in which we were, Post Office counters was under pressure, perhaps to accept conditional changes to whatever it was, training or software or whatever, to get to that point of acceptance.
Just explain what you mean there. I think I understand it, but for those that may not.
So the key...
A pressure to accept conditional changes to get to acceptance.
So the key process as the development with Pathway proceeded as a Post Office solution began to focus on contractual acceptance. That is, the conditions under which Post Office counters would say, yes, we accept this solution. And because of that, we will meet certain contractual conditions about payment. So we were aware of that. The individuals concerned as well on the Pathway side were obviously working under pressure to get this done. Again, I think there was goodwill to try and get it done as well as possible. And I think that many of my colleagues in Post Office counters did enormously good work to try and ensure that we had a satisfactory solution and outcome.
Can we now look at some of the material with that background in mind? There are a large number of documents that might be raised with you concerning your earlier involvement in the project between 96 and 98. And I'm not going to go through all of those because they principally relate to what we call phase 2 matters, which have already been addressed with other witnesses. And in the interest of proportionality, it's more important that we concentrate on the phase 3 issues. There are a few exceptions to that, which I just want to look at now, please. Can we look at poll 302 and 8591? will come up on the screen. Thank you very much. This is a Post Office Counters Limited service management report,
Yeah,
and I think you'll be familiar with the style of the document.
yeah,
You'll see that this one is dated the 30th of June 1998, and it relates to the period of May 1998. You'll see the author is Dennis Wong, who in the bottom left is described as a Horizon performance analyst, and we can see the distribution list that includes you, first column, fourth
sure.
down. So this is before the benefits agency withdrew from the project, May
Indeed, yeah.
98.
Yeah,
And can we look at page 6 of the document, please? And we're dealing here with the benefit payment system, so the BA part. And under the subheading lost transactions LT, the document reads, a baseline has been introduced this month to regularly indicate current levels of lost transactions in an easily readable form. This has been carried out to reflect TP, I think that's transaction processing, is that right?
that's correct, yes.
What was transaction processing?
Transaction processing was the unit within post office counters which derived information from the cash accounts to produce the post office accounts.
Thank you. And service management concerns. These concerns are that current levels, whilst presently manageable, may not be acceptable to the business when large volumes of encashments are returned by newly automating post offices. Lost transactions indicate, when extrapolated for BES only, that's the benefit encashment service, is that right?
That's correct.
Volumes that may be startling in the live service. It's worth noting, however, that caution needs to be exercised when viewing raw figures, as there may be variables and arguments that might affect extrapolations. That's a relatively significant warning, isn't it?
It's a significant warning from a low-level volume of encashments at an early stage of development. But it's a signal that there is something not right.
And it was essentially being based on what was being seen in the operation of the Horizon system in relation to the benefit payment system.
That's correct.
And we're here about 18 months or so before national rollout, is
Yeah.
that right?
Yeah.
Can we look, please, next at poll 302-8589? And the same style of document. This one's dated the 28th of July 1998, I think produced by Mr. Tunnock, the Horizon Performance Manager. Did he work under you?
Not directly, no.
And we can see that this relates to the period of June 1998, so the period following the one that we just looked at.
Mm-hmm.
And again, you're on the distribution list.
Yeah.
And again, if we just look at page 6 of the document, and you'll see that under the same heading, benefit payment system, the title of lost transactions, as the text says, has been changed to incomplete transactions, as this is considered to be a better description of the problem. To date, all transactions have been recovered by manual fallback. And then this second paragraph, it's been agreed within both POCL and ICL pathway that the current levels of incomplete transactions is not acceptable for a system where the primary function is to record and manage transactions. Just looking at that, that's obviously right, something that you would agree with,
Yeah.
that lost or incomplete transactions is not at all acceptable for a system whose raison d'etre is to record and manage transactions.
That's correct.
From a POCL perspective, it would seem reasonable to expect that the Horizon system has integral safeguards to protect and preserve transaction data. No doubt you would agree with that sentence too. It's not unreasonable for the Post Office to expect that the Horizon system had safeguards within it that were integral to it to protect and preserve transaction data.
Absolutely fundamental, yes.
Integrity, consistency and durability are fundamental requirements of any transaction processing IT system. Again, I think you'd agree with that as a principle, that integrity, consistency and durability are indeed fundamental requirements of a system such as this.
Absolutely.
As it is, there seems to be a variety of situations where the system reacts unpredictably and loses data. Again, that must have been of significant concern.
Of course it was, and these are issues arising in live operation, and some of these would be reflected back in the testing arena, and I've no doubt that they would be being picked up there as well, and conversations would be taking place between people in model office testing and ICL about digging underneath the issues that arise here so that solutions might be found.
These two documents that we've looked at look at the issue of the importance of integrity, consistency and durability from the context of a transaction processing system. Mm-hmm. Were you ever aware that one of the core requirements of the system was for data that it produced to be available to support investigations and prosecutions?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think there is documentation along the way that refers to the role of audit in the process and how audit managers would understand the system, how they could interact and investigate the system. I mean, beyond that, I know that they were part of the training aspect, that they received enhanced training about the use of the system. And I think there was an additional module about how they could interrogate the system. But yes, of course, it is important that they had that access.
Just thinking about the question more directly, were you aware at this time that one of the core requirements of the system was for it to produce data that had sufficient integrity to support investigations and prosecutions?
I don't think I was conscious of that in the way in which you have expressed it. I was very conscious of the requirement for the whole system to have data integrity. I was not specifically focused on the requirement for that to reflect into the audit process.
Was that in your time on the Programme Delivery Authority and then as General Manager of the Horizon Implementation Team ever discussed, i.e. the issue looked at from that angle?
Not to my recollection.
Did you know that the Post Office had the facility to, and indeed did, prosecute its own sub-postmasters and other staff for criminal offences?
Yes, indeed. When I was a local manager, I was often involved in the decision-taking along that line towards prosecution. Local management were a key component. So,
in what way were local management a key component?
Well, if the audit team had been into an office and found discrepancies, that would be reported back to the local management. So ultimately, dependent upon the decision required, it could reach the head of retail network, who was the senior man in charge of the field force, or when I was district manager, I was often involved in decision making of that sort. So there was a check process that said, yes, audit have found this. This is what we found. And very often, as a manager, I would interview the sub-postmaster concerned. And very often, they would have the support of the Federation of Sub-Postmasters representative. And I would go through the whole thing with them about how this had arisen, what were the issues behind it, were there any mitigating circumstances. So at that time, line management had a key role to play in the prosecution decision.
What role did line management play? You've mentioned interviewing and talking it through with the sub-postmaster. Did they have a role in decision-making as to prosecution?
Yes.
And what role did they have in relation to decision-making?
Ultimately, they would endorse a decision to prosecute. I mean, it would be taken by the audit people with the legal stream within post office counters. But it was, I think, inherently important and written into the arrangement that the local manager had sight of and endorsed the decision.
Did you mean by that they always endorsed?
Oh, no, not at all. In fact, again, I recall as a district manager, there was an arrangement whereby if the Federation representatives felt that the case was wrong, the decision was wrong in District A, there was an appeal process. And some of us from district offices out with that decision making could be called in to hear appeal. So we exercised a kind of independent perspective, bringing knowledge from our own experience into that decision-making process. And I'm pretty sure from my experience that there were occasions whereby the appeal manager might say, I'm not sure this is right, I'm not sure it's the right decision, I'm not sure about the degree of the severity of the decision, and maybe you should go back and have a look at other aspects. So there were checks and balances, I think, is what I'm trying to say.
With that knowledge that you had and that role that you performed, wouldn't it have been obvious to you, therefore, when you became Deputy Director of the PDA and then General Manager of the implementation team, that the Horizon data would be used for the purpose of investigation and potentially prosecution?
Inevitably, it would be used. It was the source of the accounting process. As I said before, though, I was not aware of any concerns from the audit community about their engagement with this. And, of course, I'm saying all this on the understanding that the system was sufficiently robust to be providing information which was sufficiently supportive of these decisions.
Why?
That would be my belief.
On what basis did you reach that understanding, as you called it?
Of what how my view of it.
Yes, you said that you were saying this on the understanding that the system was sufficiently robust to produce reliable data. Where did you get that understanding from?
I had no reason to doubt that it had.
So it was a presumption of rectitude.
It was a presumption of rectitude at the point at which we reached when acceptance was given to the Horizon system.
Was that ever tested, the presumption?
The presumption of the information being sufficiently robust to support prosecution? Not as such. The presumption was that the information was sufficiently robust for business purposes.
In your role in the PDA and then the HIT, as I'm going to call it, Horizon Implementation Team, to your knowledge, was anyone from audit, investigation or prosecution involved in discussions as to the requirements of the system in order to produce data that had sufficient reliability and integrity for criminal justice purposes?
I'm afraid not to my knowledge, not within the area in which I was operating.
If they had had involvement in the design of the system, the specification of the requirements, and the ensuring that they were being delivered. I think in your roles in the PDA and the HIT, you would have known about it.
I'm sure that there was a requirement in the requirements index of the contract that referred to this availability and this, but I really cannot recall it.
And that requirement that you're referring to, is that something that you now remember because you've seen the process of the inquiry unfold over the last 3 or 4 months and seen people ask questions about it? In any of the roles in which I was involved, I don't think I was ever at any stage consciously aware of the audit requirement or specifically focus on an audit requirement and ensuring that that was delivered. So just looking, back at this document here and that second paragraph at the end of it, where it records that there seem to be a variety of situations where the system reacts unpredictably and loses data. You said that that's the system in operation in live time, not model office testing or other types of testing. To your knowledge, were these lost or incomplete transactions on the BPS, the benefit payment system, ever seen as relevant to or a threat to the accounting integrity of the system on the POCL side?
I'm sure they would be. Again, from my recollection and knowledge, I can only presume that it would be. I cannot comment beyond that.
Can we look on, please, moving the story forwards to poll 3090839. And the second page, please. Just give me a moment to catch up in my hard copy. You'll see that this is a letter dated the 23rd of August, 1999, top right, from Ernst & Young, the well-known auditors and accountants, to David Miller. And I think he was the MD of POCL at that time, is that right?
No, I don't think... no, Stuart Sweetman would be the managing director, I believe.
Yes, quite right.
Yeah. So Dave Miller would still be director of counter automation.
And you'll see the handwriting in the middle of the top of the page where Mr. Miller, it seems, has added a note. You see where it says DWM. Underneath that, that is Mr. Miller's signature,
right,
that's been redacted for data protection reasons. And his note is dated the 24th of August 1999, so the day after the letter. And you'll see that it addresses the letter to you, one, Bruce McNiven, two, Keith Baines. And there's a tick through your name. Would that be done to record that you had been sent it or received it?
I should assume so, yes.
Thank you. And he says, Mr. Miller, please ensure that these issues are fully addressed during the remaining acceptance process. Keep me in touch. I think if you look at the letter itself, Ernst & Young say, as auditors of the Post Office, we've been asked by POCL to provide you with our views in respect of certain accounting integrity issues from tests performed by POCL on Horizon data in the live trial. We can skip the next paragraph. Paragraph 3, the live trial is limited to 323 outlets. We make our comments on the assumption that this sample of outlets will be representative of the full network of outlets. Then paragraph 4, if we scroll down, thank you. The following issue, as described to us by POCL, gives us concern as to the ability of POCL to produce statutory accounts to a suitable degree of integrity. We understand that POCL has attributed a severity of high to this matter. Paragraph 5, incident 376 data integrity. In order to test the integrity of weekly polling of Horizon cash accounting transactions, POL are reconstructing a weekly total by outlet from daily Horizon pollings. At present, this control test is showing discrepancies in that certain transactions do not record the full set of attributes, and this results in the whole transaction being lost from the daily polling. To your knowledge, was that the same or a different issue, this time in relation to the Horizon system being operated by POCL, not the benefits agency that we just looked at?
The one previously was the initial go live offices, of which there were relatively few, and they were only doing business encashment for child benefit.
Yes. I realise the difference in subject matter.
I beg your pardon. Yeah.
But my question was the issue the same, to your knowledge?
To my knowledge, the issue was the same in terms of outcomes, in that if there was a discrepancy between the two, that was a serious problem.
But the reasons for it, you don't know, is this right one way or the other, whether the technical reasons for the outcome are the same or different?
Honestly, I don't know.
In the last paragraph, in the penultimate paragraph on the page, Ernst & Young say, we're informed that an incident has also occurred where transactional data committed at the counter has been lost by the pathway system during the creation of the outlet cash account and has therefore not been passed to TIP in the weekly cash account subfiles. Both types of incident result in a lack of integrity on each of the two data streams used by POCL to populate its central accounting system. We understand that the cash account data stream is the primary feed for POCL's main ledgers and client reconciliation purposes. And then over the page, similar language used in the second paragraph on the page to the language we've been reading. It is a fundamental of any accounting system that it provides a complete and accurate record of all transactions. These discrepancies suggest that ICL pathway system is currently not supporting this fundamental. And skipping a paragraph, the nature of the gaps in both the cash account and transaction data stream is such that POCL believe they would not be able readily to explain them, and that significant balances might have to be written off to the profit and loss account. And then it goes on to deal with the impact of all of that on the auditor's opinion on the statutory accounts. The message being given by Ernst & Young here is very similar to the message being delivered by the analyst the year before. Never mind from an auditing or accounting perspective, did this letter cause you and the senior management of POCL to take stock and say, hold on, this system has fundamentally insufficient integrity and ought not to be rolled out?
Yeah, simple answer to that is yes. And this issue and some others became the final focus of the acceptance process. And Keith Baines and the commercial team put in a huge amount of work to try and ensure that the contract as it existed as we move forward still retained the right of post office counters to ensure that this question of derived cash accounts and office cash accounts actually matched was proven at a point at which acceptance was given, and it was given conditional to this being one of the conditions that was given to acceptance, and that continuing resolution would carry on and be proven to Post Office Counters Limited before further rollout took place. So the contract, as I understand it, I'm trying to remember, had various iterations as it went through. And as these things arose, there were codicils or additions put into the contract that said we still will not accept, we still will not go to rollout until these conditions are met. And I do believe it was made clear in contractual terms about the seriousness of these issues and the impact that they would have on both acceptance and rollout. Work went on this right continuously, beyond my being there, in fairness. Work in trying to prove that this would operate properly was still going on.
Even at the point of you leaving in December 99?
Yeah, beyond that. I mean, I think it went into January. When the decision to take the next phase of rollout, which commenced at the end of January, early February, I think the proof that this was no longer an ongoing issue was still being looked at.
And so essentially the answer is, yes, it was realised that this was a fundamental problem. It was addressed through amendments to the contract that introduced acceptance criteria.
Correct.
That related to it.
Absolutely.
And so, in short, we find the answer in the second and third supplemental agreements. As you refer to them as codicils.
Yes, yes.
Okay, I'm not going to take you through that. We've been through the second and third supplemental agreements extensively, but I just want to look at acceptance faults and the approach to acceptance. And can we start, please, at poll 302-8429? You'll see that on the 4th of December, Andrew Simpkins, said to be of Horizon Release Management, wrote to a number of key figures in POCL, and indeed ICL Pathway, I think, on that list.
Yeah.
What was Horizon Release Management?
As I recall, Horizon Release Management was looking at it from a POCL perspective about the conditions being put on acceptance and the way in which those conditions were going to be met.
And was Mr. Simpkins in charge of it?
Yes, he was.
And so it was responsible for the management of the acceptance criteria.
As I understand it, yes.
You'll see that this memo is copied to you, just on the right-hand side, underneath the two GRO redactions. And underneath the title of Horizon Testing and Programme Plan, current status, there's sort of an abstract. This memo summarises progress being made in the last week, the agreed next steps and issues for management attention, and highlights the continuing uncertainty between ourselves and Pathway with regard to the testing plan. And you'll see under progress this week, if you just read that to yourself. That it highlights some problems, including testing, including in relation to, as we go through the memo, EPOS and the TIP interface. It includes problems concerning cash account imbalances and problems with reference data and code problems.
Yeah.
And then if we go to the third page, please. Under impact on plan, and if we look at the third line, Mr. Simpkins says, we do not have, however, an understanding of Pathway's prognosis for fault clearances, which would help inform this assessment, nor an alternative proposal from them as to how this confidence could be achieved in a faster timescale. And then 3 lines on, our position remains, however, that based on the nature of the business processes involved, we need to see clear evidence of, firstly, a stable accounting and reconciliation position in the outlet, followed, secondly, by the transfer of accurate data across the TIP, HAPS, and BES and reference data interfaces. So was this alerting you to known issues arising with TIP and its interface and cash account imbalances on the POCL side of the project?
Yeah, I think this is the continuing dialogue about those underlying problems. This is about the underlying problems in relation to entering model office testing and then from there into live trial. And it's I think you're drawing out that it's a continuing theme that
Yes.
we'll have seen throughout, that this issue was never resolved satisfactorily along the way until we got to the actual acceptance and, as you say, the conditions on the contract.
And the document is emphasising that both live testing and the acceptance process would be important.
Fundamental, yes.
Can we move on, please, to poll 302-8571. And we should see that this is a memorandum, an update from Dave Miller to Stuart Sweetman on Horizon Acceptance, dated the 8th of September 1999. Copied to you in the top right. Can you see that?
Yep, I can.
And so its subject is Horizon Acceptance. And I'm going to look at some of the headings in here, look at some documents relating to them, coming back to this each time, if you understand.
Yep.
So if we firstly look at paragraph 1.1, where it's noted that you and Ruth Holleran, can you help us as to the role that Ruth Holleran took?
Ruth Holleran was in the PSAL structure. She took a more commercial perspective on this, so if some of these failures affected the contract or the commercial outcome, she would be involved in that transition.
So Bruce McNiven and Ruth Holleran have done excellent work squeezing a better training deal out of ICL Pathway. The incident remains at high because of the need to support training with a better help desk facility. However, this will in all likelihood be downgraded to a medium incident with an agreed rectification plan and therefore no obstruction to acceptance. Can you help us? In what way did ICL Pathway need to be squeezed in order to provide a better training deal?
I think going right back to the early requirements, they essentially said that counter staff had to be trained to a degree that they could confidently, accurately handle the due process in terms of their interaction with customers, and that managers of the outlet could do that and be able to use the information to produce a satisfactory balance in the office. It was difficult all along the way to get a clear understanding and an acceptable outcome from ICL Pathway that, from our perspective, met those requirements. I think right back at the beginning, the proposed training schedule was something like half a day and then workbooks and essentially distance learning. So through iterations over months and indeed over a year or year and a half, we had moved this along to provide a much better classroom training environment, much more appropriate content, a beefing up of the balancing training content, and ultimately a defined role within POCL to support offices as they went live and subsequently on first and sometimes second balancing, which we attributed to failures of the training product, which ICL contested. So ultimately there had to be an agreement at the end of the day about how this would operate, how sub-postmasters would be supported through training, and how they'd be supported post-training in the live environment. And we did succeed in reaching an agreement, which actually involved the deployment of a large part of the post office resource in the retail line into the support mechanism.
We're going to come to that a little later, but can we look first at the acceptance incident relating to training, which is AI 218, and look at poll 302 9130. And look at page 4, please. Thank you. You'll see this is the AI relating to training, 218. And under the description of the incident, it records that the manager's training course is not acceptable due to deficiencies in the accounting modules. In the live environment, the training given did not equip the users to perform the completion of Office cash accounts. This is and I think that should read basic POCL function that is central to running an accounting for the POCL network. So just dealing with the two issues that are being raised there. Firstly, the manager's training course is not acceptable due to deficiencies in the accounting modules. Can you recall what the deficiencies in the accounting modules were?
I can't specifically recall each individual component. The testing of how well it was operating was in the confidence and the accuracy with which the sub-postmaster, say, could complete his cash account in his office within a reasonable timescale. So what we were observing was the outcomes being unsatisfactory. I think in terms of content, I can't remember, I could not go into detail. But there was insufficient time initially given to allow sub-postmasters to work with the system to gain that confidence. So that time was expanded and different scripts were written to enhance their experience. But I honestly just cannot remember in terms of individual components of that training script.
And so you couldn't recall now what was done to address the deficiencies in the accounting modules?
Not individually, apart from the length of time given to it, devoted to it, and an increase in the detail, but I was not involved at that granular level.
And then it says in the live environment, the training given did not equip the users to perform the completion of Office cash accounts. This is a basic POCL function. Can you recall whether any work was done to establish where errors were arising, whether they were due, in fact, to poor training rather than a systematic or structural bug, error or defect in the system?
It's a key question. From perspective of trading, we regarded the deficiencies as a training issue in that people had not sufficiently understood how to interact with the system. If it subsequently transpired that that was never going to work because of deficiencies in the software, that may have appeared later. I think we have to remember that it didn't apply to everybody. Although there were sub-postmasters who struggled, there were sub-postmasters who succeeded. And I think because of that, we regarded it more of a training issue than an underlying software issue. I honestly, we had concerns about the underlying software, but in my experience, we did not relate that software issue to...
Was that consciously addressed? I.e.,
Se-
we know on the one hand that this system has got some quite a significant number of errors, bugs, and defects that we know about through a range of measures.
Yeah.
Some of them we're being told about by ICL Pathway. Some of them we saw in model office testing. Some of them we're seeing in live testing. Some of them we're seeing as the system is being rolled out. Issue 1. Issue 2, there are problems being reported to us with the adequacy of the training that sub-postmasters are receiving. And in particular, they're struggling to perform basic accounting functions. Is there a connection between the two?
I think it depends at the point in time at which you look at this. In model office testing, where post office staff were invited in to run the system as live, but in a model office environment, there were deficiencies because things were not working properly. That was early on. Throughout all this and running in parallel with all this was the pathway process and assurance that as these issues arose, they were being fixed. So we have what we see, visibility of issues, and alongside it, a reassurance that these things were being fixed. So at Model Office, I would say, yes, Model Office was probably about software issues that it wasn't working properly. When it came to live trial, there were two parts to that. This is in May 1999. So there were the initial go live offices which were being upgraded, as it were, from what they did to the full release software. And they had a training process there, which was not working very well. Again, alongside it, things were being done by Pathway. When we came to the next batch of live trial offices, the new offices being brought into the process, of which there were about 100, it was observed that the outcome of the training was better. That sub-postmasters were saying of that batch that they felt more confident about their ability to complete a balance. However, there was still sufficient concern that written back into the acceptance process, an additional group of offices, I think about 25 or 26, were brought into what was a final training product and put through that training product as part of the live trial in addition to the baseline numbers. And as I recall, the feedback from that was actually quite positive. So we had gone from a position of concern, suspicion, and not working over months to a position of rectification seemed to indicate that the training product was operating, and this is a leap, but that the basis of the system on which that training process was working was also operating because balances were being maintained and were being reached.
Was there, to your knowledge, any communication to post office auditors, investigators or prosecutors about imbalances and discrepancies maybe being caused by training inadequacies in this early period, and that should be taken into account in investigatory and prosecutorial decision making.
I'm honestly not aware of any conversations or interactions of that kind.
Would you agree that it was a logical thing to do?
It may have been done. I'm not aware of whether or not it was being done. I know that auditors were being trained alongside.
Just going back to the question, would you agree that it would be a logical thing to have done?
It would.
Can we move to page 7 of the same document, please? Which is a letter from you dated the 10th of August 99. We just scroll to the bottom, please. You're given the title here, Director Horizon Programme.
I think that's wrong. That's erroneous. I never carried that title.
No. And then going up to the top of the page, I think we can see that it's to Mr. Dix at ICL Pathway. Was he your opposite number?
Not really. I think he was brought in to try and resolve this issue,
The training issue?
the trading issue.
I
yes,
see.
because it was a high-level incident.
And the title is Review of Acceptance Incident 218. And you said an analysis of the evaluation against the business impacts identified in the acceptance incident is attached. I'm not going to go through, but there's a 5-page spreadsheet attached. Although many of the criteria have been met, it is regarded as significant that the training and go-live process relies on the deployment of POCL HFSO resource. Is that Horizon Field Support Officers?
That's correct.
And just explain, please, what Horizon Field Support Officers were.
Yeah, there were two aspects. One was support to the actual go-live event at an office and the migration of data. And then subsequent to that, they were also deployed to support, as I said before, the first balance and also potentially a second balance, to provide support and confidence to the sub-postmasters.
On the basis of this evaluation, we're not prepared to reduce the severity rating from high. POCL's view is that without this resource, that's the HFSO resource, there would have to be a complete revision of the training approach in order to ensure help desks were not rendered ineffective by the high level of calls following the first and to some extent subsequent balances. Just to make clear what you're saying here, you're saying that your training ICL pathway is too heavily reliant on the need for our field support officers to be deployed out on the ground to help sub-postmasters balance their accounts. Is that it?
That's correct, yes.
So your training's inadequate because it needs us to put people, boots on the ground, to actually help sub-postmasters do the most basic function, which is balancing their accounts.
That's the perspective we're taking there. I think ICL Pathway would say we have fulfilled the obligations for training. We don't know the competencies that exist out there amongst 18,000 post offices.
Wasn't that obvious to them? That there would be some people who were 18 and keen and some people who were 87 and who'd never switched an electronic device on in their lives?
Yeah, I think it might have been obvious to everybody. I don't think, in fairness, POCL would say they had a clear understanding of the competencies of the estate of sub-postmasters and assistants. So I don't think coming in, POCL were able to say, we know who will adapt to this more quickly and we know who won't adapt to this. We have an understanding of offices which maybe cause problems, but we don't really understand the whole estate.
But just stopping at that point,
Yeah.
was thought ever given to taking a sample of SPMs beforehand to gauge the level of competence?
I think you're going to talk to Catherine Cook later this week, who was so custodian of training within POCL. Catherine Cook did some work in association with this debate about what competencies we knew about out there. Now, I know this is downstream, and maybe all that work should have been done as a management of change process, and perhaps it would be done if we started again. But I think we're trying to understand this as we went along. But what we were convinced about was that the training product did not meet the requirements of every individual. And some individuals had to be supported post-go live.
Again, if you're designing a training course, don't you first establish what the level of existing competence is and the training needs of the likely cohort to whom it is to be delivered?
I think that's a fair comment.
And just very quickly before the break, if we just look at the headline of the ICL response, that's at page 12 of this document. I'm not going to read the whole document, it's on the system and is available for reading, but in essence, in replying to your letter of the previous day, Mr. Dix, who's the author of this letter, says Pathway is convinced it's done everything it can to improve the training and prepare users for Horizon, and that the essence of the remaining issues that you're seeking to address relate to POCL's own management of change. So he's saying it's you, not us, essentially.
Yeah, he is. He said that the kind of things that you've talked about understanding levels of competence, and also I think he's inferring that some of the back-end processes which we were changing to adapt to Horizon being in an office were contributors to the whole end-to-end training knowledge. And that was the position they took.
Yes, thank you. So might that be an appropriate moment to take a 15-minute break?
Yep, about 15 minutes. Do you want to make it 25-2 or 22, Mr. Beer?
25-2 is fine.
Fine.
So. Thank you, sir. Mr. McNiven, can we go back to poll 302-8571? You remember we were using this document as our basis for exploring a range of issues, and we looked at training. Can we go on, please, to the second page? So the third page, actually. The second page is blank. Third page. Thank you. And under summary, and just see what Mr. Miller says. Of our 6 key players, Keith Baines, Ruth Holler and John Mayer, Bruce McNiven, David Smith and Andy Radker, the first 4, so I think that includes you, would opt somewhat reluctantly for conditional acceptance towards the end of September. Andy Radker and David Smith would not accept and seek to use the full period until 15th of November to force improved performance from ICL at Pathway. Can you help us? Why did you consider it was preferable to push on with acceptance in circumstances where the criteria had not yet been met?
Conditional acceptance. Because I did recognise there were issues. I can only reflect on what was being said at the time, that resolution programmes were in place, that the people who understood those felt that the resolution would be effective. People like John Marr, I mean, I knew John Marr, I had many conversations with John Marr, and I had faith in his judgment, and he was on the technical side, and other people who have been here before. we're saying that, yeah, there are still problems, but these problems are reducing and the resolution is effective, and we expect that it will be sufficient to go to acceptance with conditions, and the conditions I think we spoke about before, about some demonstration of that effectiveness continuing beyond the conditional agreement for rollout. So I just try to take it in the round. I listen to what is being said. I look at the area that I had most responsibility for, which was the physical infrastructure and rollout and training. And from that perspective, I was reasonably confident. I was very confident about the physical implementation side, and I was accepting the judgment of colleagues that it was capable of being fixed. And I suppose ultimately, I would say that in all my dealings with ICL, how frustrating they may have been, the battles that may have been involved, this was a world-class IT company. And I fundamentally do not think that they would allow over the line a system in which they had no confidence.
Was the system in front of you on the beginning of September working as a world-class system?
No, that fair comment. It was not, and that's why the acceptance process still had significant issues attached to it, and those issues would continue until they were resolved.
This is only 4 weeks after your letter
Yeah.
of the 10th of August to John Dix,
Yeah.
which in the letter and in the annex to it set out a full range of issues known to both Pockle and to Pathway. What had changed in that 4 weeks to make you, by this time in September, reluctantly agreeable for conditional acceptance to proceed?
The letter to John Dix was specifically about trading. I was content that there were procedures in place. There was a new document from ICL Pathway that outlined changes to the whole training process, including an awareness event which had not been there before. We had essentially agreed that there would be post-implementation support, and ultimately that was paid for by ICL Pathway. So from a training perspective, I was confident it could be done. What more can I say? I accepted advice from the people closer to the technical end that things would be resolved.
Can we look to the foot of this page, please? Under the heading, where do we go from here? At point 4, Mr. Miller says Bruce is preparing the bullet point brief for John Roberts and will incorporate acceptance into it. So I think John Roberts at that time, he would have been chief executive of the post office counters.
Yeah.
And a member of the board, obviously.
Yes.
At this point in time, you were obviously a key member of the Horizon implementation team. You'd moved on from the PDA.
Yes.
And you were the senior member of the Horizon management team.
Of the Horizon field implementation team. Yes.
Thank you. You worked under Mr. Miller.
Yes.
And you had a good working relationship with him, presumably. He trusted you.
I hope.
And presumably that's why he, when he deputed somebody to draw up a bullet point memo for the chief executive officer, he chose you to draft it. Is that right?
I would think so.
At this time, did you understand that this wasn't simply a transition from a paper books ledger system to a digital accounting system? There was a much broader process of change that the implementation of Horizon brought with it.
it was becoming apparent, yes.
Was it your view and those around you that the post office would, going forwards, not wish sub-postmasters to have the facility to challenge the data produced by Horizon?
I really can't comment on that. I don't know. I did not know, and I do not know with hindsight whether they had that opportunity or not.
Were you not party to any discussions, or did you not become aware of the absence of a facility allowing sub-postmasters to challenge the data produced?
To my recollection, I cannot remember being aware of that at that time. I have seen subsequent documentation that refers to it.
Did you understand that this had a dual purpose? It was intended to limit or remove the SPM right to challenge, but also to reduce the costs and resources expended on the issue at Chesterfield?
I'm totally unaware of that issue.
Was there any sense in the discussions that you were a party to that automation had the benefit of exercising greater control, central control, over the accounting process by the post office, both by the IT and by reason of the contractual terms of sub-postmasters?
I think I would have been aware of a movement towards conformance, that things would be done in a coherent and repeatable way by sub-postmasters across the whole sub-office estate, which would be to benefit of the post office if that was done and done well.
Were you aware that the obligation was placed upon sub-postmasters to cover any accounting shortfalls with their own money?
As I recall, going back to my previous line management, local management responsibilities, there had always been a provision to that extent, and there were mechanisms in place to try and work out, say, how much of a deficit might be accountable to the sub-postmaster's actions. I mean, it could be that a sub-postmaster just gave someone a double benefit, and that then came back to evidence for us. And we would then say, well, ultimately that was your doing, and therefore you must make that good. So there was always a provision of sorts about sub-postmasters rectifying financial shortfalls of which they were a part.
What about a change to irrespective of cause?
I'm not aware, was not party to any conversations of that type. I find it now, being faced with that, hard to understand that would have been an outcome. I'd have thought there would always be a management intervention in that decision.
When the system was being rolled out, does it follow that you weren't aware that the contractual terms for SPMs required them to make good shortfalls, irrespective of cause?
I'm absolutely not aware of that. My previous experience was a requirement to make shortfalls, but there was a decision-making process within it.
The briefing that you prepared for Mr. Roberts, did that just relate to training, or did it extend to other things?
I mean, I've read that and I've seen that I was preparing a bullet point brief. I can't recall the outcome of that.
No, we haven't got it.
Yeah.
Can we look at an email that was sent at about the same time as this paper that we've been looking at that also concerns a briefing of Mr. Roberts? That's poll 304 3705. And look at the second page, please. Just wait a moment whilst I catch up. Yeah, sorry, if we go back to the first page, I called it an email, it's an electronic memo. Can you see that? And then go to the page afterwards, please. You'll see this is dated the 10th of September 1999. And so a couple of days after the document we've just been looking at. And it's from Stuart Sweetman, sorry, to Stuart Sweetman from Mr. Miller. And we can see that you're copied in on the top right.
Yeah.
And it's an update about acceptance at 10:30 a.m. on Friday, the 10th of September. In paragraph 1, there's a full update on Horizon generally being sent, enabling Mr. Stewart to brief Mr. Roberts on Monday. And then if we go to the numbered paragraphs, under 1, very considerable progress has been made in the joint workshops with ICL Pathway, but as of today there were still 2 high incidents, data integrity across the TIP interface and system stability around screen freezes, which would, in the post office view, make it difficult to accept on the 24th of September. And then paragraph 4, if we were to stick rigorously to our agreed process, I would not be allowing further rollout. And so, were you a party to the creation of this document, or were just a recipient of it?
I think I was only a recipient.
But the overall, the document is highlighting that the outstanding incidents aren't related to training. They include data integrity across the TIP interface and system stability.
Yes.
And so this memorandum, I think you'll agree, makes it clear that these 2 important issues were being raised with the senior management team closest to the board, clearly and in writing.
Yes.
And they were being advised that the decision to go forward with conditional acceptance in September 1999 was a departure from the agreed processes for acceptance.
Strictly speaking, that would be correct.
And why was that recommended?
I don't know if this goes on to talk about any more activity on those exceptions, but I think that those exceptions still had rectification activities around them.
It says that in 2.
Yeah.
The 2 incidents have rectification plans. But I don't think there's anything else about those in the memorandum.
No. I'm only surmising here that it's taking a view from the previous document about why some people, myself included, felt that perhaps we should continue to move forward. There were pressures. I think everyone felt some pressure about continuing to move forward. I know there were
Where was that? I'm so sorry. Where was that pressure coming from?
Three sources, I think. One was the impetus behind rollout. Now, that was something I was immediately involved with. So by the stage, the whole process, which went back 6 or 8 months of offices being visited, offices being surveyed, offices being modified, offices being made ready for implementation, there would be, by this stage, some thousands of offices probably ready to go to implementation, and a build-up of expectation, not least amongst those sub-postmasters, that this was going to go ahead and they were going to be part of it. From a personal perspective, I think there was a pressure that I've always believed that we should get this done, otherwise, as I said at the outset, we would never catch up again. I think I was aware of and probably responded to external to my own team pressures about commercial activities, political influences. The Treasury Review had given the go-ahead and money was committed.
And at a day-to-day level, how did that pressure manifest itself?
I think it manifests itself in terms of our relationship to Pathway. It would be fair to say that we were under pressure from Pathway to move forward. I mean, it talks about workshops. I remember being involved in a number of meetings with ICL Pathway at senior level where they were trying to downgrade incidents to a level which the contract would allow to go ahead. We, myself and colleagues, were in essence trying to say, no, we're not going to do that. We won't allow it until we have more proof. That level of impasse then translated into a series of workshops between the people most closely involved, at working level workshops, that try to disassemble all the reasons behind these problems not being resolved. But they were then being translated into plans to resolve them, rather than decisions about not going forward at all. So the impetus was on resolution, as opposed to stopping. And that's a pressure in itself, I think.
Can we turn, please, to move forward in the chronology a little, to poll 3090428. And we can see as the edge of the spine tells us that we're about to look at the annex to the second supplemental agreement dated the 24th of September 1999. And we'll see that this document, which is very long indeed, 218 pages in total, includes very significant detail on the proposed rectification plans. I want to look at AI 218 and training in particular. And can we go to page 65 internally, please? This is part of the resolution plan for AI 218. And under the third bullet point, it records that the joint workshop on the 13th of August, that's 13th of August 1999, accepted that not all users within the large population will absorb Horizon. This may eventually call for closure of the outlet, replacement of the sub-postmaster, or training of additional staff. It's been agreed between POCL and ICL Pathway that other steps taken within this resolution plan should minimise the risk of this, and that any residual fallout will be handled by POCL. POCL have agreed to review and strengthen the relevant process. This is reflected in the timetable. And then if we just go back to the previous page, please, and look at the foot of it. The paragraph right at the bottom, further to the activities above, a workshop took place on the 13th of August, which identified 7 specific areas for potential improvement. Commercial consequences of the actions below are agreed in an exchange of letters between you and Liam Foley of ICL. These are as follows, and then they're set out, including the one that we looked at. So what is recorded in that third bullet point seems to be the product of an agreement reached between you and Mr. Foley in correspondence. Did POCL accept before acceptance that there would be some sub-postmasters who would never absorb, in inverted commas, Horizon?
I think we accepted it was possible. A number of sub-postmasters resigned of their own volition as they became aware of the implications of taking on an automated process in their office. So there was a fallout from that as well. So it was not surprising if there would be a fallout from the training process. The training process was structured such that there was a competency test. It wasn't called a competency test from the sub-postmaster's or assistant's point of view. It was a certificate of competence. But there were some who just would fail the test at the end of training because they were presented with some scenarios to which they had to give answers. And even with some help, there were some that failed. We managed to then arrange for them to be retrained along the lines of the same module and to be retested. The agreement with ICL was that if people, sub-postmasters or assistants, failed a third time, then they would return to POCL as our responsibility rather than a pathway training issue. And I suspect from that there were discussions. If it was a sub-office assistant, there was the opportunity for the sub-postmaster to train them, to take them under the wing and try to help them a bit more. If it was a sub-postmaster, there was help given in terms of balancing. But there was fallout. There would have been, and there was some fallout along the way from people who thought, I'm not going to do this is just not for me. In which case an outlet may have to be closed.
So the fallout would be closure of the post office or replacement of the sub-postmaster within the post office. And did you understand that the means by which sub-postmasters who could not or would not absorb Horizon would be through their contractual liability for errors?
No, I did not associate a training and a withdrawal with contractual liability for errors.
How did you think that the non-absorbers would be, as part of a residual rump, removed?
It was often by mutual agreement that the sub-postmaster and the local manager said, this is not working. Or the sub-postmaster said, I'm not going to continue with this. So it was a kind of a voluntary resignation.
What if it wasn't voluntary? What was the means by which sub-postmasters who couldn't absorb Horizon would be removed?
I'm not aware of any force majeure closures of offices because a sub-postmaster had not passed through that phase successfully.
So how would they going to be removed then? How did POCL intend to remove sub-postmasters?
As I say, I think it was a mutual agreement. It was a conversation. I don't think we're talking about a great number in the population here by that stage. But I think the local management would have a responsibility to the customers of a post office, as well as the integrity of the post office finances, that if, and this is always the case, that if they felt that a individual sub-postmaster was not performing to the requirements, there would have to be a conversation about what happened next.
Was any link drawn between the ability of sub-postmasters to absorb Horizon with the adequacy or inadequacy of the training with which they were being provided, which I think was a day and a half, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that goes back to all the support that was then put in place. I mean, I don't know the numbers, and I suspect it would be quite small if we got to that point. And I think along the way...
20% that failed the, in inverted commas, competency test initially, is that right?
Initially, that may be right, you may well be correct. But that's of all people, assistants and sub-postmasters, of course. But I think that I would expect that local managers, the whole system, would go as far as they possibly could to help a sub-postmaster. It was his business, to help him run his business properly, even if that meant line resource, local managers going out there on successive visits to try and help them.
So the role of the local manager continued to be absolutely central. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. And the field force that was sent out were converted from their normal jobs of managing numbers of outlets to specifically supporting the whole of that balancing, reconciliation, help process. So some 350, 400 people were put in for that purpose.
In your time, were you ever aware of the removal of the local manager from the decision-making process in relation to investigation, audit and prosecution?
Can you just say that again, just
Yes.
so I understand it?
In your time, were you ever aware of the removal of the local manager from the decision-making process in relation to audit, investigation and prosecution?
No, I wasn't. I wasn't.
Can we turn to the issue of balancing as a part of the training process and acceptance? Can we look, please, at NFSP 400120? Might have been easier if I said NFSP 50120. Thank you. And look at page 2, please. This is a letter from addressed to Colin Baker, and if you just scroll down, please, and go over the page and scroll down. From Paul Rich.
Right,
You're a copyee at the foot of the page.
yes.
You'll see, if we go back to the first page, please, that the first page of the letter, the second page of this clip of correspondence, thank you, that the letter is dated the 4th of September 1996. You'll see in the third paragraph that you're referred to Bruce McNiven from the Programme Delivery Authority. Is that right? In September 96, you were performing the role of the Deputy Director of the
That's right.
PDA.
That's correct.
And then you'll see in the third, that third number paragraph, it says that you will be in touch with Mr. Baker of the NFSP separately to notify you of a structural framework we intend for sub-postmasters to be involved in both user acceptance testing and in generating possible solutions to operational problems that might arise. You and Bruce will discuss the NFSP's part in that to help smooth implementation. So the part of the sentence that says involved in both user acceptance testing, just explain to the chair what user acceptance testing means.
I should imagine that would encompass two aspects of the process. One, model office testing, where sub-postmasters and some directly managed counter staff would be brought into the model office environment and run through the scripts and the process using the equipment as it then was to test how it was operating. And the other one would be the live trial itself, which was, I suppose, the key point within the process where sub-postmasters would be introduced to the system.
And so this is an early recognition of the importance of end user, i.e. SPM,
Absolutely.
involvement in the process.
Indeed, yeah.
What, if any, steps did you take in 1999 to involve sub-postmasters in the acceptance process?
There was no formal process for their involvement. Their experiences in the live trial would inform a view that we were taking about adequacy of various aspects, but there was no formal involvement in acceptance.
Was there any involvement of SPMs or their representatives in the negotiations over acceptance in the autumn to winter period of 1999?
Not to my knowledge, no. I'm pretty sure the answer to that is no.
Given the early recognition of the importance of the experience of end users, why is the answer no?
End users had been involved in those processes I talked about. We also, I remember vividly, we had open sessions with the people involved in live trial to get their feedback in an open meeting. There were two in Bristol with the Southwest, which I attended. There were two in the Northeast, one of which I attended, and Dave Miller attended the second. And I think it's fair to say we had a hard time. I did, because a number of the sub-postmasters at that stage of development of the live trial, were unhappy about their experience. And they told us, and we accepted that. I should say that
what were they unhappy about? I'm sorry.
Mostly about the balancing and about the length of time. It's the length of time more than anything else. That it seemed it was taking them into balancing. Usually was about a 2.5 hour process, even in manual times, and that was the expectation in automated times. I think ultimately that was achieved for many people. But during live trial, I mean, with hindsight in live trial, we exposed a lot of those people to enormous amount of difficulty. To some extent, that might have been expected because it was a live trial. We wanted to know what was happening. We wanted to know their experiences. But some of them were unhappy about that experience, and they told us.
And so they were struggling in the language we've looked at to absorb. Would that be correct?
To absorb, and I think it was mostly about the balancing. Their big issue was about balancing, the difficulty of achieving it and the length of time it was taking.
Can we, in that connection, look, please, to NFSP 50271? moving on a little bit, but still in your role as PDA, this is a letter from you. If you just look at the second page, scroll down. Thank you. And that's interesting. This is dated the 22nd of September 98, and you're referred to as the General Manager of Horizon Implementation. Is that right? You transitioned into that role by then?
I transitioned, yes.
Going back to the first page then, 22nd of September 98, to Mr. Baker again of the NFSP.
Yeah.
And if we look at the third paragraph, please. You say to him, I know you would like a workshop to review in detail the horizon summarisation and balancing and how this will be approached in training. I hope to provide this soon, but we're still in the early stages of detail on this part of training, and it will be mid to late October if I will be able to set up suitable arrangements. Is this in response to, or does it appear to be in response to, the NFSP flagging the importance of there being training on balancing as early as the autumn of 1998?
Yes, I would think so. There may have been 1998. There may have been some exposure in model office testing by that stage, and some sub-postmasters may have been involved.
And balancing, or the difficulties with balancing, have been pointed up as a problem then?
I would think so.
Did the workshop there discussed take place?
I honestly don't know. I cannot recall it. Recall it taking place specifically for Federation representatives.
Can we look, please, at NFSP 50340? And look, please, at the second page. This is essentially a report on Horizon training as relayed by Pam Jarvis on the 30th of April 1999. You can see from the heading at the top. And she reported the first day of training is okay, but the second is bad because it's rushed. They're not finishing on time, but are rushing to finish before 3:30 because otherwise they have to buy lunch. Why did they use the most expensive hotels? Skipping a paragraph, in every training session nobody has done a main balance, snapshot balances only. Nobody had been trained to do a full balance. The trainers are people who have only received the same training that they're giving out. It's too narrow a field, I think that is. And no one can answer questions such as, do we use the same form? There were a lot of computer problems which were blamed on the fact that the computers had to be ferried in and out of vans a lot. Do you recall receiving feedback like this?
Yes, I do. This is the 30th of April, is the early part of bringing offices up to spec for live trial. And I suspect that these were offices that were going from initial go live functionality up to the full release functionality. It was the very early runs of training, full training for that purpose. And I recognise this. I recognise these problems at that time.
I mean, I skipped over it. This was a fax from Colin Baker, the General Secretary, to you, I think. What did you do with this information?
Well, I mean, this is April. All of this was going into the perspective that we had about training being a high-level incident, you know, a pass-fail incident. If it was not put right, it was part of acceptance. So it was it was information that supported the perspective that we were taking.
In what way?
In the way that we had already expressed to ICL Pathway that we were not happy with the training product and it had to be modified and improved. Those debates were going on a very regular basis with Pathway at that time and from that time up to the revised training package that they produced.
And just look over the page, please. And look at the foot of the page, please. 4 paragraphs on the bottom. Everyone stressed that all sub-postmasters must be told to complete a manual balance if there are problems, or even do a double check. They are told that the balance goes down the line to horizon, but once that happens, if there is a query, then sub-postmasters have no proof of any work that's been done. Do you understand what that's referring to?
I think you asked earlier about the opportunity for sub-postmasters to interrogate the balance once it had been completed and whether or not they could influence that. And I'm sure I understand that they did not have that facility. So at this stage they were being advised to perhaps do a manual backup.
What does the manual backup involve?
A manual cash account, as they did before they actually transitioned onto the automated system.
How would they do a manual cash account?
They would still have a cash account process, a piece of paper that was their cash account that they used to fill in manually. And if it was as difficult as this, they would be probably transposing the work they were doing into that balance manually at the same time as putting it into the system. So they're replicating what they did before.
Was that running of a dual or shadow
That's correct, yes.
system limited to this stage of the process?
I mean, this is quoting someone saying that that's what they should do.
Yes.
That was not official advice. That was people at the training session being told, you should do this because it's difficult to recover things otherwise. I don't think we ever advised sub-postmasters to do a double entry type system.
Did you hear about it being done, nonetheless?
Only in terms of this.
Not more widely?
No.
So there wasn't a period, for example, during live testing, when people were asked to do what you refer to as sort of double entry bookkeeping?
Absolutely not, no.
So here that everyone stressed that all sub-postmasters must be told to complete a manual balance. What do you understand, and I appreciate this is a document that was sent to you and not written by you, what do you understand the everyone to refer to?
Everyone. I think they mean, I think the people from the experience of that training episode were saying, from our experience, sub-postmasters should be told to complete a manual balance.
So we should read this as meaning that
Sub-postmaster to sub-postmaster, I think.
not trainer to sub-postmaster.
No. No.
And sub-postmaster to sub-postmaster are saying that it should be trained, that sub-postmasters should be told to complete this second or shadow account.
I don't think it came through form. I think it's sub-postmasters saying to the Federation to say to sub-postmasters, look, there may be problems and we suggest that you might wish to do a manual balance at the same time as you're doing the horizon balance from the experience we have at that point in time. I don't believe this was ever formally adopted or transmitted.
Was it ever picked up by management as a sensible precaution, given the consistent and repeated problems with weekly balancing?
I don't believe so,
To your knowledge,
to my knowledge.
was this picked up whilst we are getting these repeated complaints of an inability to balance? Sub-postmasters, certainly in the live trials, should be advised to run a mirror on paper of the accounting system.
I was never aware of or party to advice of that nature from a formal perspective.
Yes, thank you. Those are the only questions that I ask at the moment. There may be some questions from others. I think Mr. Maloney was
Yes, he's nodding.
first on the list.
Over to you, Mr. Maloney.
Mr. McNiven, I just want to ask you about one topic, which is the essential nature of data integrity to the system and the extent to which that was part of the audit process. You've mentioned that. You said that you were aware that data integrity was essential to the system, but you weren't specifically focused on the requirement being part of the audit process. Is that right? Or about...
No, I think I was saying I wasn't specifically aware of auditors being engaged in the work that we were doing in terms of data integrity.
I see. Could I take you to POL 29130? It's a document you've already been taken to. And could I go to the letter at page 7 of the PDF? And you've already been taken to this letter.
Right.
And this is a letter from you, Mr. McNiven, dated the 10th of August 1999 to Mr. Dix at ICL Pathway.
Yep.
And we can see that you introduced the letter by speaking of an analysis of the evaluation against the business impacts identified in the acceptance incident, and that's acceptance incident 218, that's attached. Yep. And in the letter you raise a number of issues around this acceptance issue 218. And if we could go to the document, which is on the next page, page 8. This is essentially what you've described in the letter. Now, before the letter was sent, and before the attached document was sent, they deal with a number of issues. Would there have been discussions between POCL and ICL Pathway about these issues, essentially talking them through, and then this is a distillation of what's gone on in terms of your work on the process?
Yeah, I mean, there were continuous conversations on all these issues, training and all the rest.
Yeah.
Both through myself to people like Liam Foley, etc., in ICL Pathway, but also through workshops being held between people closer to the issues, I would say,
Yeah.
on both sides, to try and come up with a resolution, to try and produce a solution that said that meant that the training content was better than we started off with. It was ongoing, it was continuous, it was sometimes difficult, and there were often arguments.
And this document is essentially a summary of where we are and where we'd like to get to.
Yeah.
Yeah. But there were many discussions behind it.
There were many, many discussions behind it. I think, if I just may say, the outcome of that exchange of letters between myself and Mr. Dix was probably such that we POCL understood that the deployment of a large part of our field infrastructure was going to be deployed to support sub-postmasters during the rollout period,
Right.
and that we would give them all that support. There's a positioning behind this that says, and we're not going to pay for it. There's a commercial aspect to this. So, and that would come out later on.
Sure. Were you involved in the drafting of this document?
Um,
And I'm not
The
don't mean the letter, I
evaluation.
mean the attached document. Yeah.
I don't think I actually wrote any part of that. It would pass through me.
You'd have to approve it.
I'd have to approve it.
Yeah. And was it approved above you in line management before it was sent?
I don't think so. I think Dave Miller would be well aware of the position that had been talked at the Horizon management meetings.
Yeah.
And I think he would be, I would have given him an indication of what was going to happen and what I was going to say.
Yeah. Okay. So if just to, I only want to look at one aspect of this document, but if we just look at the various columns, we can see business impact in the first column, summary of success criteria measure in the second, and an evaluation in the third. Could we please go down to I think it's the next page, but it's number 5. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 down the side. So it's the next page again. That's it. And I'll read through it if I can to begin with, and then come back to ask you questions about it. At number 5, under business impact, there's also an impact on TP who are having to process a significant increase in errors on class and pivot, up to 3 times as many weekly errors. This is having a significant impact on resources in TP during the live trial. These errors will also raise liability issues between the POCL and sub-postmasters and POCL and client organisations. And then we see under summary of success criteria measures some definition, of, as it were, of the problems that TP are having to deal with. And we return, I think, really here to the receipts and payments mismatches that were apparent throughout the process. So we see reduction, this is the summary of success criteria measure, reduction in both the number of incidents where receipts do not equal payments and incidents where balance brought forward does not equal balance due to post office on previous cash account, and then reduction in the number of errors reported by TP, both class and pivot errors, relative to the sample. And then evaluation, overall the incidents of receipts not equal to payments have reduced and the residual causes are under investigation or have been resolved, criteria met. The level of class errors between 26th of May and 21st of July has reduced. Without full information, the indications are that pivot errors have also reduced. Now, it's back to the first column that I'd like to take you, if I may please, Mr. McNiven, where it reads at the end of that section, these errors will also raise liability issues between the POCL and sub-postmasters and POCL and client organisations, yes? Is it fair to say that there was an awareness that errors would produce liability issues? Yeah.
Yes.
And was it obvious, really, that if there was a receipt and payments mismatch, then if there was less money than was expected, then it's potentially going to give rise to liability issues?
Yeah. There were always errors. There were always error notices, as they were called, coming from transaction processing, the Chesterfield accounting people, going back to sub-postmasters, previously in the old accounting system, because things came to light after the event, and sub-postmasters often had to correct things and understand why it had happened. What this is saying is there are more of them. There's more of them than there were previously, and that's an issue, which is absolutely correct.
And there are issues of financial liability, that's what you're referring to?
Ultimately, there was a conversation we had about financial liability and sub-postmasters for losses. Was always a liability.
Yeah.
Obviously, if there were more issues, there'd be more questions of liability.
Well, precisely. And so there could be a question of debt recovery, would be one thing. But also, from the experience you had of prosecution decisions that you've told the inquiry about today, you must have been aware of the potential for prosecution.
I was always aware of the potential for prosecution in the event of misbalances.
Yeah.
Everything that was being done was to try and ensure that misbalances were not a function of the system. And that's what the work was intended to do.
Now, this document went to ICL Pathway.
Yeah.
And this document is a distillation of the discussions, the many discussions that you'd had with ICL Pathway around the acceptance issues. So far as you were concerned, ICL Pathway was aware of the liability issues that might arise from the payments and receipts mismatch.
I would expect that to be the case.
Thank you very much, Mr. McNiven.
Is that Mr. Beer? Are you aware of any other would-be questioners?
Other people have put in
No, but Mr. Steen, sorry,
requests.
he sent me a secret code by saying no,
shaking
by
of
shaking his head.
shaking of the head.
Mr. Mayor can see that because Sir, I had questions, but they've all been covered by counsel
Fine.
to the inquiry,
Thank you very much.
so
Mr.
nothing
Henry.
further.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for coming to give evidence to the inquiry, Mr. McNiven. Thank you. So, I think this afternoon's witness is remote. Is that correct, Mr. Blake? Have we got a likely time for start? 2 p.m. So we have an extended lunchtime. All right.